Welcome back to the Craftsman Online Podcast. This is a weekly program focused on the relevant topics in Freemasonry and the various aspects of the craft. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, Editor-in-Chief of CraftsmanOnline.com, and I look forward to bringing him back every couple of weeks. He's a reoccurring guest on our program. Brother John Nagy, my unofficial co-host here on the Craftsman Online Podcast. Welcome back, Brother John.
Thank you so much for having me once again, Brother Michael. It's an honor and a privilege.
Always. And in this aspect, we're welcoming him back as Brother Nagy, but also as author Nagy. We'll be talking about his latest book, The Craft Mastered, where author Brother John Nagy explores the questions of mastering the craft while decoding Masonic ritual. It will also be, of course, making those crucial connections that reveal the originations of our ritual and really what early Masons wanted to learn. And I think this is the first time, while we had our intro here, we've had you on to talk about one of your books, his 16th book. So what inspired you in the beginning to take on this quest of tackling such a huge topic of mastering the craft?
It was a perfect storm of questions that came up for me as I was exploring a specific topic. And it started with, why do we not have the working tools include the compasses? And at that particular point, I said to myself, well, they've got to be working tools. I mean, they're part of the craft. So why aren't they mentioned? And as I was listening to the first degree and I was having the description of the three great lights, I said, holy crow, there is a description given as to what they are and how we're supposed to use them, which makes them a working tool. And at that particular point, I said, I wonder how many other working tools there are in the entered apprentice degree that are either alluded to or actually required if the entered apprentice were to actually do the work that the degree points to. And we've had this discussion in a previous podcast. That triggering question unfolded a plethora of a tsunami of information and light as to how many working tools the entered apprentice actually had to be working with or developing in order for them to accomplish the perfecting of their ashlars. And then there was a question having to do with, extreme. We're talking about EA in one hand, and then another, like a beautiful bookend here, where I asked a question, if all the ruffians had to do is complete the temple, why didn't they just complete the temple? And then from that simple question, I said to myself, well, if they were to complete the temple, what would it take? And at that juncture, I said, wow, if we take a look at what the entered apprentice has to do with basically laying a foundation for the temple, and we look at exactly what it is that these fellow crafts didn't do and what the actual fellow craft work was, which is basically raising themselves up through the process of educating themselves and looking at the 7 liberal arts and sciences and studying them. If they had fully completed their temple, they would have fully completed the study of the 7 liberal arts and sciences. And I said, holy crow, that's the secrets of a master mason. Bingo, right there is the EA work and the fellowcraft work, by which if a person doesn't complete those two basic things, their temple will never be completed. And therefore, they will never be able to comprehend what the master's word is. And of course, then I started looking at, well, if those were the two things that had to be laid down and then completed, then what exactly is the master's word? And that's when I started recognizing, okay, I got to start writing some of this stuff down.
And as we talked before the recording, in the Craft Mastered, I feel that it's almost like a 3-act play. I would subscribe for any newly raised Master Mason. You're going to have questions about our ritual, and you will find the answers not only as you broke this into, I looked at it as 3 parts, and you're like, but wait, there's like 16 chapters. I know, but I looked at it as the 3 parts are, there's your explanation of the symbolism, which there's so much of that in our degrees and in our ritual that you have tons of questions as a Master Mason when you're told everything that you need to know about being a Freemason is contained in the Master Mason degree, but yet you still have questions. I love that part. You also get into some of the other deeper meanings of what I call like our affectionate Masonic objects. So the apron, you get deep into the symbolism that originates there, a little bit more of the ritual, the work that's required as you keep talking about to advance to the degrees. And then the last part to me, which having been a seasoned Mason now of about 7 years, I'm starting to go, wait a second, we're told that within the pages of this book are all of the answers, and you really help break down a lot of that biblical, historical context that is sometimes lacking in our ritual.
Thank you. I was blown away by how intimately connected the research I was doing for this book was with a question volleyball that was going on between Nick Adair out in Alaska and myself. And it started out with, this shoe, what's with the shoe at the in the first degree. And as he and I were playing volleyball back and forth with looking at the research having to do with the shoe and Ruth and Boaz and the widow's son, and it became clearly obvious that that's really something that we don't explore enough. We don't get into these little Easter eggs that are just splattered throughout ritual, that if you open them up, that sweetness inside those Easter eggs is just absolutely fantastic. It makes the experience of a Freemason that much more valuable when you can find these beautiful Easter eggs and see how they relate to the work that we're supposed to be doing as Masons.
The book is The Craft Mastered. You can find it on the show links to purchase it right off of Brother Nagy's website. We're also going to hook you up with where you can find it on Amazon if that's how you want to make your purchase. What I love about reading a book, especially when you get to know the author, and I'm hoping that our dear listener who's been following us from your first appearance on the show to now is like, oh, I kind of know this guy, is there are positions and statements that you have said on our podcast, and I know you've done it in your presentations. It's part of you that is also in this book. So I want to start with the first, where you take a position. So I'll ask, what is wrong with the phrase making good men better? And what does that mean, quote unquote, Masonically?
It's a nice slogan. However, from what it is that I have seen and experienced in my craft dealings, it's not supported by craft activities. We pull very good men into the craft and we have them memorize things, and then we plug and play them into basically participating and bringing other people into the craft. Nowhere does the activity of making a good man better actually occur. There's beautiful ritual that spells out what we're supposed to be doing to improve ourselves, but that's about it. Nowhere within any Grand Lodge that I've ever experienced is there any activity that says, okay, let's roll up our sleeves and start taking a look at some of your vices and superfluities. Let's talk about investing virtue. Let's talk about time management. Let's talk about all the different things that the first degree and the second degree point us toward. There is no studies going on other than maybe study groups on the side that are not Grand Lodge sanctioned, having to do with the trivium and quadrivium. 7 liberal arts and sciences are not studied in any way, shape, or form through the craft, but it is studied by the craft in little side activities. but the Grand Lodges don't support these activities. So to have a slogan saying making good men better, I explored a chapter having to do with, well, what exactly is better? And what it really comes down to is, in order for you to be a better man, you have to start out with a foundation of morality and improve that morality um, as best as you can. And in doing so, you actually do make yourself a very dangerous man to the immoral people that are in the world. You are able to spot immorality, and you can deal with immorality and be able to put an end to immorality or immoral practice in your dealings with other people. Now, you can't control other people, but you can definitely call it out and spell it out and point it out and take safeguards to let other people know when things are occurring. And to be a good man, you are dangerous to the immoral people of the world. You are dangerous to the individuals who would take advantage of the ignorant and the naive. You become, as an educated man, well, as Spider-Man said, with great power comes great responsibility. And the entirety of the Masonic practice is to empower and enable in a very, very functional and healthy way, so that you, well, you have greater power than you did before you joined. And with that comes the responsibility of making sure that you carry that responsibility well.
Anyone that knows me, I read a book, I get into it. I'm really bad about notes in the columns, highlighting pages, marking things. And one section that you dedicate, and I feel that we could go deeper into this on a future podcast episode, but I wanted to start at least the conversation here, is, for me personally, it's one of the biggest myths in Freemasonry, and I always believed it until I met you, and that is that as we are symbolically building our temple is not finished until the day that we pass and lay down our working tools and head to the Celestial Lodge upstairs. Why is this one of the biggest myths in Freemasonry?
Because it's a logical fallacy. What's happening is you're redefining the word temple and generalizing it to mean the temple that you build during your lifetime. And the fact of the matter is, the temple that needs to be complete is very specific. It's the 7 liberal arts and sciences. That is the temple built on a foundation of the entered apprentice work. And that temple needs to be completed before you can truly do your master work. And I've said this before, the entered apprentice degree is preparing to learn. The fellowcraft degree work is about learning how to learn through the 7 liberal arts and sciences. It's scholasticism, died and true. And it's only after you lay the foundation of a very, very well-ordered heart and then a very, very well-ordered head or thinking, what happens is it's only then that you start learning, which busts the door stops out on the argument that, oh, I'm always going to be an apprentice because I'm always learning. And the fact of the matter is, if you're truly an entered apprentice, you're not learning. What you're doing is you're taming your dogs. You're literally taking the animal aspect of your nature and you're bringing it under the rule and guide of the volume of sacred law that you set your plumb on. And yeah, there's learning, but it's only a specific type of learning, and that's basically having to do with making sure your heart is ordered. And when you get into the learning of the fellowcraft, what you're doing is you're training your mind to recognize patterns, well-recognized patterns that have been recognized for decades, if not eons. And these patterns enable you to be training your mind to be receptive to other patterns that you'll see in nature and in social intercourse and reading of literature that has been around for, well, thousands of years. And it is only after you've trained your heart and trained your mind to be open to what the volume of sacred law and the volumes of sacred law have to offer that true learning begins. So when you hear an individual say, "Oh, I'm always learning, therefore I'm always going to be an apprentice," they haven't done the work. They don't know what they're talking about. They have no clue how naive they sound. And I'll tell you, I've given full day workshops where I drum this into the participants' heads and hearts. And inevitably, there's some old guy who has basically been indoctrinated into the Freemasonic thinking. What he does is he'll lean back and say, "Well, we're all entered apprentices. We're always learning." And it's like, did you not listen at all to anything that I had said over the last 6 hours? And the fact of the matter is, they're in a trance. They're in an autopilot. They're not thinking through exactly what it is they're saying. They've heard it before. They thought it sounded really good. It's an absolutely the best. It's false humility. And it sounds great. It sounds really good coming from an old geezer. But the fact of the matter is, it's got no basis in craft activities. And it's wrong.
And I appreciate you breaking down, the myth that the temple isn't completed or it is complete, because I found myself questioning that. I know that, taking the third degree, it made me a Master Mason. I was raised with the Sublime degree. Obviously, the brothers that cared about me in my lodge weren't going to let me become a Master Mason if I wasn't duly and truly prepared and well recommended. But
I'm going to interrupt right here. That was done to you. You did not do that for yourself. That was done to you. You were put through the first degree. You were put through the second degree. You were put through the third degree. But did you do any of the work that each of those degrees asked you to do? So although it was put upon you, label A, B, C, you've got the first, second, and third degree labels. But did you actually do the work to lay the foundation and complete the temple? And we're not talking about the spiritual building that is discussed or revealed in the movable or immovable, depending on what side of the ocean you're at. But we're talking about the trestle board, the description of the trestle or tracing board, where it talks about the spiritual building that you're supposed to erect.
right.
And it's not the temple. It's an entirely different building structure. The temple allows you to be able to read the blueprints and read the rules and the designs as laid down by God himself. But you cannot read and understand the rules and designs until you've finished your own temple. And the temple is basically Solomon's temple, or that body of wisdom that is required for you to comprehend what God has been conveying through his great creation and the words that have been put down by those who were inspired to reveal the word of God.
One of the notes I took from the book was, I feel that there is a movement with modern Masons where we're almost like an incomplete master, in that we went through the degrees so quickly with, sometimes a month, maybe 3 months in between, that, as you just laid out, maybe we're proficient in the ritual, but we're not proficient in the comprehension or the understanding. And I know from myself personally, I did find myself in that situation and still kind of do, where as a Master Mason, I find myself going backwards, rereading, revisiting the lessons, so that when a brother like you says, well, did you do the work? And I would say, well, yeah, I've put thought into circumscribing my passions and keeping it in due bounds. I know what my vices and superfluities are in life. I know where my weaknesses are. I know it's more than just maintaining control or discipline of my tongue. I understand the word caution and what that means. I understand not just as it applies to talking to people who have questions about Freemasonry and want to learn our secrets, but that really the actions I have and the way, and you start to understand, I think, the larger things in life. And that's where it goes to your other point of, do I feel that I'm a good man who was made better because of Freemasonry? Yes and no. I was made better because I learned the lessons that Freemasonry was trying to show me and everyone else, but I learned them individually by really doing some self-evaluation and inner reflection.
Therein lies one of the problems that Freemasonry doesn't do justice. We have jurisdictions that push to get a person up through the Master Mason degree so they can participate. And fortunately, what's happening is we do have a few jurisdictions that allow entered apprentices to participate in some of the business meetings. They don't have a vote, but they can participate. And majority of them, from what I understand, you have to be a Master Mason before you can participate in that fun and folly, the minutes and the treasurer's report and what have you, and discussing about dues and, next fish fry. And what you have is a push to get brothers to the Master Mason level so that they can participate in bringing more members in, so that they can participate to bring more members in. And the challenge here is we've lost sight as to what really is the purpose of the ritual. It's not to bring more members in. It's not for us to continue a flow of cash as a result of having the degrees paid for, and then ultimately recurring finances having to do with the dues on an annual basis. If we don't have individuals actually improving who they are and making themselves better men, what happens is they become members of what I call the fastest growing alumni association in the world. You got a revolving door, and we're, as fast as they're coming in, they're being spit out the other side as a result of them recognizing that there's nothing there other than basically putting on performances for the new candidates coming through so that they can put on performances to bring in new members to continue the chain. And there's got to be something that is being offered to the membership that reflects what our values espouse. And if we talk about moving people, males from youth to manhood, well, how are we doing that as a fraternity? And then I hear them point to, well, you have the demolay. Said, sorry, you have people who are 21 years old joining, and you have people who are 50 or 60 years joining, and obviously physically adults, because that's part of the requirement. They have to be a physical adult, legal. But are they spiritually, emotionally, intellectually adults when they come in? And how are we as a fraternity helping mature them intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually? I don't see anything going on, at least none of the jurisdictions that I frequent. And I believe that a good deal of the members coming in are looking for something like that, and would stick around a lot longer if they had something that they could sharpen their metal on.
More breadcrumbs for you. We've been catching up with Brother Nagy, and on this episode of our podcast, focusing on his book, The Craft Mastered, I talked about it, and you alluded to it in the opening, that there's three awesome sections in the book when it gets to the deeper meanings of the symbolism, the ritual. But then I want to save a little bit of time here at the end of our podcast episode on the biblical and the historical context. And you started by talking about the book of Ruth, and you dedicate some serious pages into the story of the widow's son and Ruth. I don't want to take too much away. I want the reader to be able to get their value and their experience of this, but can you summarize that for us? Can you give us a little bit of the lesson of that and the importance of it, at least as it pertains to Freemasonry?
We are the inheritors by being members of the craft. We are the inheritors of a unbelievably rich history and a rich assortment of light that enables us to bring males to not only maturity, but bring them into a spiritual awareness. We are the inheritors of a tradition. And as inheritors, we have a responsibility to make sure that members actually do know what it is that they stand to inherit. And if we do not take the time to share with them at least the basics of what it takes to move from youth to adulthood and finally prepare for age, and to bring about order to the chaos of their souls so that they can start that venture into the spiritual realm where they strengthen their and bring order to their spirit. If we do not at least give them an opportunity to understand the mechanism to bring that about, they can choose whether they want to participate or not. It's entirely their own choice. We don't have to shove it down their throats, but we do need to put it in front of them to say, hey, here is the inheritance. As a widow's son, you have inherited a rich tradition of moving people from an ordered, bringing them to an ordered spirit, an ordered soul to an ordered spirit. And if you want spiritual awakening, if you want to be able to explore the Master's Word and understand what the Master's Word actually is, and it is absolutely so simple, and yet you will not be able to explore one part of the Master's Word if you don't understand the trivium, which is grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And the two-book theology, it requires you to study the quadrivium, because without the quadrivium, you will not understand the other half of the Master's Word. It's impossible for you to understand the other half without both of these things under your belt. And there's only one way to do it. You have to study the 7 liberal arts and sciences after you've brought order to the chaos of your heart. Because it's one thing to experience the richness of the knowledge that the 7 liberal arts and sciences has to offer, but without a strong foundation of the heart, the wisdom will not come through. So you'll have the knowledge, but you will not have the wisdom. And it's, again, a two-part educational process that positions you so that you can understand the Master's Word, but you can't get, I mean, literally, I could hand to you the Master's Word and you would not be able to comprehend it without the studies that I just pointed out. It's impossible.
It's interesting because every time I talk to you, I'm always wondering, what is he working on in his head as far as what's next that we get a little taste of here on the podcast. And just for the listener, our next podcast, if you enjoyed our conversation that began tonight about the ruffians, we'll be getting back into that with Brother John in 2 weeks when he returns. Until then, this has been the Craftsman Online Podcast. And yes, thank you to our guest, our author, our brother, John Nagy. Thanks again for coming back.
It's an honor and a privilege, and I look forward to what is to come, Brother Michael. Thanks so much for having me and for exploring this specific topic. It's near and dear to my heart.
If Masonic education is important to you, you can sign up for our email newsletter. That's at craftsmanonline.com. A reminder that new episodes of our podcast are available for download every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.